Flying over St. Peter Port, we look down on the quayside, which forms the pits alongside the famous Castle Cornet, the small rocky outcrop in the British Channel steeped in British maritime history. For many of the overseas competitors coming from different parts of the world here, the hint of British tradition here on Guernsey provides part of the attraction, along with the fun and the testing racing conditions, which makes Guernsey one of the most popular racing venues in the Class 1 World Series. And the daily 12 o'clock gun is a great attraction to the drivers and visitors alike. But in Class 1 racing terms, what a season it's been. A different winner at almost every Grand Prix. Great character and contrast between venues like this in Guernsey and places like Saint-Tropez and Venice and Marbella. The teams will ultimately conclude the championship in the Gulf at two new venues in Dubai and the Arab Emirates. What 1993 will see is still uncertain, but for sure the championship continues to develop as more and more teams challenge for the championship title. From the European mainland, boats were brought over by ship, coming from Cherbourg into the tiny St. Peter Port, while the rest of the contenders came over from the British mainland also by ship, having contested one of the rounds of the European Class 1 Championship. As with motor racing, glamorous machinery and glamorous girls seem to go hand in hand. Powerboat racing is no exception, but here in Guernsey it's the great parade which always attracts the crowds down to the quayside. The boats put back up onto their huge transporters and towed through the tiny centre of St. Peter Port. It's an annual fiesta for the people on the island and a welcome break from the stresses and strains of racing for the teams and the mechanics. The atmosphere builds as the lorries twist and turn their way through the tiny streets. Tomorrow it will be the throttlemen and their drivers who define the destiny of these huge machines out on the water. But today it's the lorry drivers who must navigate and negotiate these tiny streets. Fancy dress and water pistols are the order of the day. Everyone joins in, even the police. But finally, as the sun sets, all the boats must return to the pits. A final checkout before qualifying and the setting of pole position tomorrow. In the meantime, the party goes on. The 4-litre World Championship title has already been settled in a week-long racing festival around the island's waters. But now it is the turn of the world's largest racing boats, Class 1, to turn out onto the water. Paul Picot provided a remarkable run, setting unofficially the fastest race time in a Class 1 championship race this year. 92 has been remarkable also for Richard Carr in his first full season in Class 1. But this is how the championship looks heading into Guernsey. Rainbow Bears with Steve Curtis and Leonardo Polli heading the table at 78 points. Finscrew and Achille Motors tying on 54, and then Carr in Techni Lamborghini on 34. A great achievement so far in 92, and it's rumoured that he fancies his chances here in Guernsey. Norberto Ferretti watching as Richard Carr looks down inside the cockpit of his Cougar hull, a boat that is almost identical in design to that of Richard Carr's. The huge boats lined up along the quayside, cars in the foreground, then Achille Motors, as the teams prepare to go out and qualify for pole position. Not a pole position as we would know it in the true sense of Formula One motor racing, but a 1-kilometre sprint over a straight line to establish who has the fastest boat and the fastest engine-propeller combination set for the race to come. Engines the talk of the pits this year, diesel dislodged by petrol, Lamborghini with 3 out of the top 4 boats so far.
Well, I'm the official driver, and I've only got one official Lamborghini driver. I do anything from engine installation for them, designing water systems, fuel systems. I work very closely with the factory on this boat, and this is really everything that we pioneer says okay, like our air induction system, like our water tank system, they tend to put out to the other boats, and they normally get it 3 or 4 races after I get it. So really I'm sort of like a test bed for Lamborghini.
I noticed that Giesse are running air scoops on the top of each engine bay cover, and yours is obviously the single scoop just behind the capsule. Has there been something discovered there that they're needing more air, and therefore they use the twin scoop?
Yeah, pretty much. What we're basically finding out is the colder the air, the better the engine runs, and it's quite significantly different actually. So they're really pumping a lot of air into these boats now. And because we're racing in hot climates, not so much this race, but certainly at the end of the year in Dubai, you've got to get some air in there. Fast-moving, pressurised air, best you can get.
A remarkable year that sees the defending world champions Angelo Spelter and Maurizio Ambrogetti here looking at the charts around Guernsey without a point on the table. Marco Capaferri with Mercruiser engines, the only ones of their type running in World Series racing this year. And a return to competitive racing outside of the United States since Ted Tolman ran them back in 1986. Angelo Spelter is running Isotta diesels, Andreas Ugland is running C-Tech.
We have, without doubt, perhaps the best monohull ever made. And that's why we still can run and be, to a certain degree, competitive. We had a 4th place in Marbella, you might remember. And we have been up sniffing a couple of times after that on the top contenders. And a day like this, yes, we can do very well.
How much lift do you get from that wing?
The wing really starts working at about 85, 90 miles an hour. At that time, it stabilizes the boat and also helps us give quite a lot of lift at the back. But of course, it depends a little bit on the adjustments. But we had a good help from Pininfarina in their wind tunnel.
The weather conditions have been changeable here this week, the race organisers calling regular driver briefings to update them on the sea conditions. The race is very carefully controlled, safety is uppermost in everyone's mind. And one thing the spectators know, on the exit of a driver's briefing is a perfect opportunity for a souvenir. All of them, though, preparing for the pole position run. Dalla Carbonare, the surviving sister boat to Giesse, who lost 1/2 of the whole of one side in Marbella. Renato Molinari with his new carbon fibre hull, yet to prove its paces, but he is extremely confident of the performance. The Lancia engines have been changed. He now runs Isotta diesels. Out goes number 93, Francesco Rinaldi and Anelli from Italy. This is a design of boat that predates the highly successful Achille motors, also built in the Steyne yard. Pole position here in Guernsey, run over a straight kilometre, the crowds gathering on Castle Cornet and around the Lighthouse Pier. The course itself run on the southern side of the island, finishing right in front of the castle. The scream of the Lamborghini engines and the roller props biting into the water as Steve Curtis and Leonardo Poli head down their kilometre run. It's a great time, but will it be good enough as GPS, a diesel-powered boat, follows them down the course? Every team must pass through a start and then a finish gate, the 1 kilometre run between the two. Without these, it's not possible to qualify for times. Saratoga heads through and away from the start gate and down towards the finish gate in a dead straight line through the 2 orange buoys. Amazingly, Bonomi in Port Picot misses both the start and finish gate and fails to qualify. Renato Molinari is using the Guernsey event to set his new carbon fibre hull up for the Grand Prix Series next year. It's his first departure into composites in the construction of powerboats, always using wood in a traditional method. The aluminium hull, built by the Steyne yard of Domenico Achille, is tremendously powerful on the course, with Lamborghini engines giving him a high and competitive speed. Kojimi has yet to feature seriously in the championship so far this year, one of the longer boats running here and built in the same yard as the defending world champions, fresh and clean, driven by Angelo Spelter and Maurizio Ambrogetti, but the drivers of this boat, Panzini and Palanca, have yet to show true performance in the championship. But the time has come here in Guernsey for Paul and Shark. Domenico Cirilli and Marco Riganti, an excellent combination of driver and navigator, take pole position just ahead of Rainbow Bears at 168.3 kilometers per hour. Giesi comes in third ahead of Achille, but ER, driven by Renato Molinari, shows its performance coming in fifth. Great potential for 1993. The significant part of this qualifying session is that Paul and Shark is powered by two French Baudouin diesel engines, the first major achievement in powerboat racing for this engine manufacturer, giving them the edge over Lamborghini, providing the power in Curtis's boat. Out of the 5 inhabited Channel Islands, 3 of them will be raced round. At the final driver's briefing of the day, Marco Riganti and Domenico Cirilli step up to receive their pole position awards. The drivers and their teammates are awarded points for pole positions over the season as well. So far, Curtis in Rainbow Bears has 70, Paul Picot 60. SDA and Paul and Shark tie in 5th place with 30 points. With 3 rounds of the championship still left to go after this one, there's still plenty of time for this team to improve on their points and maybe head the table at the end of the year in the United Arab Emirates. In the meantime, the weather has turned from bad to worse. The Italians' worst fears of British weather had been lived up to, and constant drivers' briefings updated the teams on the sea conditions. But the long-range weather forecast was indicating, come rain or shine, the sea would be rough, and the teams had to prepare for a difficult race. In the past 2 years, Guernsey has had to cope with almost foggy racing conditions. This year, no fog, but rain and high winds. One last final driver's briefing, and the teams and the organisers decide to race. The tension of the uncertainty is removed. The boats head for the craning area. Richard Carr is in confident mood. But he, like everyone else, has been affected by the uncertainty.
This is always the worst time of any race, just before it, and it's elongated today simply by indecision, but correctly, because safety obviously has to be, paramount importance. Yeah, it's nasty, it's horrible, you feel terrible, and you feel like this until that green flag comes down, and then you don't have time to think of anything except, you've got to win, and that's all you do, and that's one of the reasons why I love the sport, is because it's the only thing I know that completely clears your mind of every other thought.
And it certainly did in the qualifying British heats during the course of the week's racing here in Guernsey. Carr challenging the monohull in very difficult seas. Shockwave just ahead of Carr in Techni Lamborghini. But Carr piling on the pressure with his driver Peter Dredge as they headed out away from the shoreline and out into the rougher section of the sea. This really was the proving point heading into the weekend's racing and the Class 1 World Series race. Carr eventually coming in 2nd place in that heat. As the boats are launched for the race, we talk to pole position man Marco Riganti. Winning pole position here in Guernsey, just how significant an achievement is it?
Not like a race, but it's a good one.
But it's the first step towards
Yes,
the
in
win.
the first time that we win pole position, in fact we have migliorato of about 5 miles from the beginning of the season, and this is a good result.
Ottaviani is driven by Leonardo Troia and Giorgio Leonetti. It's a Stein hull, but very, very different from that of Domenico Achille or the Chesterfield hull. Couve are based just outside Pisa and have been building boats for Spelter since he challenged for the European title back in the mid-80s. JP Matala knows that this is a critical race. 24 points separates him from first place.
Well, I'm pretty sure that at this stage of the championship, it's very important for us to finish the race. We want to keep the boat in one piece. We have a second race in only 1 week time from now, which means that we don't have a lot of time to repair any damages. So the first and most important thing is that we bring the boat home in one piece. But then again, knowing Walter, knowing myself, we are going to drive for the win, and only for the win. But of course, the beginning of the race will be sort of looking the other boat strategies and seeing what's the pace. But we are definitely going to give it everything in the end after all.
Now it's time to race. There's been a great build-up towards this event. Every team has their own method of preparation, much the same as for racing car drivers. One by one they leave the port. A minimum speed limit enforceable here. And Vittorio Missoni's teammate climbing in behind him in the safety cockpit, designed to protect all the team members in the event of the boat turning over. Richard Carr, full communication system built into his helmet. Effective communications so essential now for split-second decisions in this highly competitive sport. SDA and the Polly family out to join the rest of the fleet. Curtis just on the far side, motoring at a slightly higher speed. The mechanics making a final check on the engines. Giesi nearest us, a wave from Domenico Cirilli on Paul and Shark. Renato Molinari looking very relaxed on E-Up there. San Benedetto just behind. Then Achille Motors. And this is Team Fassa Daiwa. Aliardo Dall'Olio standing on top, looking down into the engine bay. Two highly temperamental Lightning engines, petrol-driven from the United States, enormously powerful in the Apache hull. Alongside him is Ottaviani and then Chesterfield along the quayside. Out behind us is Paul Picot, Bonomi in the front, the throttles controlled by Antonio Giuffredi in the rear of the capsule. A very unusual design of boat, 3 C-Tech engines in the back, diesel power. A wave from Patagnani as out goes Dalla Carbonara, motoring out through the entrance to the port. Roller propellers, of course, for Richard Carr. As all the boats now head out into the rougher waters to prepare to start, where they will circle in the mustering area. As we look down onto the mustering area, you can see some of the earlier boats who have already come out to warm their engines up. No longer are they allowed to run off down the coast. They must stay within the mustering area, and the boats beginning to arrive now. This is the start marshal's boat heading south, calling them into line. You can see the boats building up speed now. A moderate wind, but a rough sea, and we can expect some tremendously exciting action as the boats building up speed. These huge catamarans having great difficulty with the heavy swell here. Early race leader is Carr in Techni Lamborghini. That's Achille Motors right alongside Finscrew with JP Mattala, and it's absolutely neck and neck for those two as they race after the leaders who are at the moment well ahead of them. Achille in tremendously rough water and totally submarining there. Domenico Achille with that massive boat almost completely underwater. Slow temporarily, he's managed to pick up speed again, and somehow that huge air scoop on the top didn't intake any water, but the canopy there forced partially open, damage to the hatch. A tremendously exciting start to the race. This is the battle for second, third, fourth and fifth as you look across. Fiat Uno driven by Andreas Ugland from Norway, then JP Mattala from Finland in Finscrew, partnered by Walter Ragazzi. Superb weather for the monohull, perfect racing conditions, and the advantage that Andreas Ugland is able to take over the catamarans obvious for all to see, because behind him Finscrew, a catamaran designed for rough weather, then Fratelli, then Achille, then Johnny Lambs, and then Dalla Carbonara with Patagnani here. He must be worried about the structure of that boat after the sister boat suffered such terrible damage in Marbella earlier in the year. Very, very testing conditions for the new high-tech carbon fibre boats. An enormous pounding as they now head east, away from the island of Guernsey and out towards Sark. This is in the rougher part of the course. The throttle man having to sense every second not to overstress, over-rev the engines. This is Marco Capaferri just behind in B&B Italia, a sister boat to Finscrew, but powered by Mercruiser engines, whereas Finscrew is powered by Lightning. Both of them coming from the United States, both hulls and engines. But the drivers are very different indeed. Capaferri with Rivolta in B&B Italia, and JP Mattala with Walter Ragazzi in Finscrew. Koji Mi suffering in these heavy seas, the diesel engines just idling down there. It looks very much as if they've given up, despite having a large boat which should perform well here. Giulio Boffi turning Fratelli Rossetti out and away from the helicopter as Richard Carr heads into the treacherous Giulio Passage. Peter Dredge safely negotiating his way through there. The race leaders here for round 6 of the World Series in Class 1, and just behind is Andreas Ugland, and disaster there for Curtis. Submarined, totally swamped, attempting to pass the monohull. Leonardo Poli standing up in the front of the boat. It looks as if the hatch has been ripped straight off. Curtis also there looking. Poli banging the front of the canopy in fury at losing that race position. I don't think the damage looks too serious, but they've obviously suffered some problems there with water getting down into the engine bay as Richard Carr heads away from the rocky outcrops off the island of Herm back towards St. Peter Port. Richard Carr leading the 6th round of the World Championship in 1992, his teammate Peter Dredge. The two of them perfectly controlling this boat in the most testing of race conditions. Curtis in Rainbow Bears through the Giulio Passage, tracking the 3, 4, 5 boats ahead of him now. What a disaster for Steve Curtis and Leonardo Poli. This could seriously damage their hopes of recapturing the World Championship title in 1992. But number 201, the tremendously strong Cougar hull, picking up speed once more as they test the engines for performance, test the structure of the hull for safety. The canopy gone completely, you can see. The air scoop just above Curtis's head damaged as the helicopters hover overhead, and we chase after Finscrew. Fiat Uno just ahead of Finscrew. The stabilizing wings on the monohull just beginning to work at this speed. A beautiful sight, a monohull in heavy weather pounding through the seas. Jan Hilstadt nearest us, Andreas Ugland on the far side, as Richard Carr, still in control of this race, is giving his boat a tremendous pounding as he asks every effort from his teammate Peter Dredge, because they can see a way to their left, and down below us Fiat Uno, the monohull, challenging for the lead. It's absolutely side by side as they come down towards the St. Peter Port entrance, past Castle Cornet. Richard Carr fighting for all he knows to hold on to the lead here. A precious place for him in 1992. Techni Lamborghini in first place, Fiat Uno second, Finscrew third. Johnny Lamb's in fourth, no sign whatsoever of Steve Curtis as Richard Carr heads out away from the island once more, chased by Andreas Ugland and by Finscrew. And just behind the two of them, Johnny Lamb's ploughing through the sea there. And an enormous leap from Richard Carr, nearly nosediving it. Very, very difficult moment. Carr in control of the trim tabs on the back of the boat. Lamborghini engines for them, and obviously well suited to these race conditions. Propeller choice absolutely perfect. But what a spectacular sight as the boats turn left once more, down off Pointe de la Moye, and head out towards the sea, towards Blanchard's. And a challenge now coming from Johnny Lamb's as they go side by side with Finscrew, and Curtis is there once more underneath us, picking up speed again. Very, very difficult racing conditions here in Guernsey. Touch and go for a lot of these competitors, whether their boats will hold together in such heavy seas. Belgium, the next round in Ostend, just 1 week away. None of these teams can afford to take any major risks and seriously damage their boats, but they must be doing all of that in risk-taking terms here today. Looking down, straight down on Massimo Capaferri, Marco's son, in the Cunningham British-built hull. He's doing well, moving up from 11th to 10th. A good long boat, well suited to these heavy seas. And Eduardo Poli, still struggling with SDA, still looking for that winning opportunity in this magnificent hull, so high-tech. 4 Motori Moderni engines, and San Benedetto pulling out. Now that is Damiano Spelter. Angelo Spelter's son has pulled off the race course, but the monohull is doing quite the opposite. Andreas Ugland, Jan Hilstadt, know that their boat is well suited to these race conditions. Challenging for the lead and looking in a very, very strong position for this 6th round of the World Championship. Hillstatt nearest us, controlling the throttles. On the far side is Andreas Ugland. They're both in separate capsules. Ugland driving the boat. And at the moment, they're in a very strong position, leading the race. Carr just behind. Then Johnny Lamb's in 3rd place and Finscrew in 4th. The 4 leading boats constantly challenging each other for the lead in this most testing race in 1992. Patignani has pulled off the course, the lid of the capsule open, and the Lamborghini sounding absolutely appalling. Almost halfway through the race, Johnny Lamb's in the lead, having overtaken both Fiat Uno and Richard Carr as they come back past the start-finish line at Castle Cornet, but right up behind Johnny Lamb's comes Finscrew. A direct challenge for the lead. Extraordinary racing side by side, and Finscrew into the lead as they go past the marker buoy. As we look down from Castle Cornet, spectacular sight. Finscrew leading the race, Johnny Lamb's in 2nd place, Fiat Uno in 3rd, then Technic Lamborghini and Carr have moved down. Whether they've got mechanical problems or not is difficult to say at this stage. B&B Italia Marine, Marco Capaferri, and the challenge coming once more from Johnny Lamb's. Very, very close indeed, but Finscrew holding them off. Walter Ragazzi and JP Mattila in this fabulously prepared skater hull from the United States of America, but finding it very, very tough going here today. Down behind Giulio Boffi, and that was very near disaster for Giulio Boffi. The nose of their boat high, so high in the air, a moment longer and they would have been over backwards. That could have been a disastrous moment for them. They've managed to recover, demonstrating just how easily these heavy boats can be put out of shape. The strong winds here and the heavy seas lifting the noses of the boats. But Johnny Lamb's, what a remarkable day's racing for them. 3 team members in this boat. The Rampazzotti family, husband and wife, Monica Rampazzotti providing the navigational ability of the boat. And they have taken the lead ahead of Ragazzi and Mattila down there in Finscrew. The capsules set very low in the boat. Richard Carr in Technic Lamborghini back in 4th, still maintaining pace. No obvious physical damage to their boat, which is very different to some of the others that have pulled off the course. Eduardo Poli further back in SDA, damage to the rear left-hand air scoop. You can see a piece flapping around there, obviously taken a serious pounding, and they still haven't managed to solve the problems of transmitting the power from 4 engines through 4 drives down to the propellers. Bindi Fantasia, one of the longest boats here, through the Giulio Passage. Very difficult waters around this part of the course, but Bindi safely negotiating their way through there, driven by Rugali and Guaracino, 15th in the World Championship with 7 points to their name. 6 of them taken at the Maltese Grand Prix and just 1 at the previous round in Pescara. Paul and Shark trying to find their way through some very, very heavy water there. Giulio Boffi has recovered his boat, Fratelli Rossetti, and his composure by the look of it. They've picked up speed again. Fratelli Rossetti with Giulio Boffi in control, heading out across the course. No apparent damage after that terrifying tip up almost vertically, and then the boat swinging back down again. They moved up into 7th place, and look at the damage to the canopy above Curtis's head. Caved in there, the top of the canopy gone completely, and the metal structure right over the top collapsed above his head. And he's still finding some very, very heavy water down there. With the canopy open, they must be getting extremely wet inside. Domenico Achilli through the Giulio Passage and out towards the island of Herm. The new race leader, Finscrew, has moved past Johnny Lamb's. Johnny Lamb's has slowed quite considerably. Number 75 into 2nd place now. And Walter Ragazzi and JP Mattila in Finscrew, obviously getting more aggressive as the race goes on, finding the performance that they require from the skater hull to beat this boat here, Johnny Lamb's. You can hear the subtle changes from the throttle man on the revs. But can Finscrew hold off the attentions of Johnny Lamb's, because it's been a neck-and-neck battle here in Guernsey with 3 laps in. We've got 1 more to go. Paul and Shark having done so well in qualifying, their boat not well suited to these rough racing conditions. They were right off the plane there as the race leader went past them at Point de la Moye, down on the southern coast of the island of Guernsey. Finscrew, number 8, in the lead. A remarkable performance. Not far behind is Fiatuno, Andreas Ugland from Norway, Jan Hilstad in the distinctive bright red monohull. Fantastic battle going on between them and Richard Carr in the catamaran just behind. Carr has backed off somewhat from his performance earlier on in the early laps, first and second, which saw him leading, but now a challenge coming once more as he comes into the calmer water off the eastern coast of Guernsey. Cardinal out, number 33, another retirement. The safety crew's moving alongside there to check that all is well, and they require no assistance, I'm sure, but very, very difficult racing conditions. The cougar hull of Rainbow Bears coming round now, Curtis and Polly. Damage to the top of the boat after that massive submarining, and we hear there's been another submarining since. They're just ahead of Giulio Boffi in Fratelli Rossetti. Just behind, diesel power, petrol power up ahead. The Lightning engines leading the race. Then here we have Achille Motors. They've survived an enormous submarining as well, and surprisingly the air scoop on the top has not suffered the same sort of damage that the Cougar hull scoop has done. These boats all needing a large volume of air down inside the engine bay. Smaller scoops on the back of Finscrew, and Finscrew coming in for a close challenge now as Johnny Lamb's comes up alongside. Neck and neck racing after 4 laps in the most rough racing conditions we've seen all season long, and they take the lead. Johnny Lamb's, number 75, moves into the lead. The Rampazzotti family, tremendous control of this boat. Back in second place, Finscrew, Ragazzi and Mattila from Finland. So close at this stage, almost like circuit racing. Quite remarkable performance as the two of them head back across the bay towards the island. Johnny Lamb's in first place, Finscrew in second place, side-by-side racing, offshore Class 1 style. As they come into the final mark, Johnny Lamb's just ahead. Who will take the checkered flag here in Guernsey? So close. Lamb's keeping up the speed. Finscrew just dropping back slightly, carefully into that mark, turning left, past the castle. It's just seconds apart. Johnny Lamb's takes the flag, Finscrew in second place. The closest finish in a Class 1 race that we have ever seen here in the shores of Guernsey. Just look at this. Offshore racing comes no closer than this 1992 World Series, proving that the format for this year is bringing the level of competition up to a superb level. But Johnny Lamb's, the hatch is up in great celebration. This is a first-time World Championship win for them. To my knowledge, not even a European Championship race has fallen to this team so far, so a great success. That's Monica Rampazzotti, her husband there, Johnny Lamb's, with the winner's points here in Guernsey. Great celebration. That's Walter Ragazzi and JP Mattila just behind. JP describing just how close they came on occasions. Superb racing, a marvellous day's event, and championship points aplenty for those that deserve them and had the nerve, because the seas really tested the competitors here. JP Mattila and Walter Ragazzi second, Jan Hilstad, Andreas Ugland in Fiat Uno in third, helping up the winners onto the podium there. Here come the laurel wreaths. There's the Winners' Cup. But this is what the championship looks like now. Rainbow Bears with 83, Finscrew up into second place with 72, Achille with 58, Johnny Lamb's just 4 points behind Achille now with 54 points, and Carr in Techni Lamborghini down with 43. SDA has managed to pull in 1 point, their first World Championship point in the time of the running of that boat and the one that preceded it. 4 years of trying, 1 World Championship point, and millions of dollars spent trying to develop the speed. 30 points to the winners, 18 to second place. A huge crowd here in Guernsey watching the presentation. Champagne sprayed, and afterwards we spoke to Monica Rampazzotti.
What did you think of the race today?
I am very happy because this race is was very hard, very, very hard.
One of the worst you've raced in? The hardest race you've had?
Yes.
And today you just managed to beat Finscrew by 1 second. How did that feel?
I am very happy that Ragazzi remain behind.
A second behind?
The second, yes.
Not a boat length even. How was it they kept ahead of you?
Well, Johnny Lamb's is a quick boat, and the buoy before the last finishing buoy was the buoy when they took their attack. And,
the lower heads?
Yes, the lower heads, and they were just on our left-hand side. And the only technical problem we had between the last buoy and the finishing line was a spectator boat which was in directly on our line, and we had to, just go maybe 20, 30 yards to the left to avoid it. And that's how they came to the final buoy just before us.
You obviously had problems out there. Can you describe what they were?
Yeah, we started off and we were running real strong. We were in the lead level with Richard, and we were running up to the Gulio passage, and I backed off just before turning the bend and dropped the nose in, and we stuffed, which stopped us for about 4 minutes, I guess. By the time we got running, it took me like a lap to really get the engines clear again, because obviously there was a lot of salt water around. And we did it again on the third lap, which was a bit unfortunate, so we cleared it out again. So all we managed to do was catch up to 6, which, as it happens, wasn't great, but in fact we were in front of Achille, not in front of Finscrew, who are the people who are chasing us, so we're still leading the championship. And, we've only got a 10-point lead now, but, we've got 3 more races to go, so maybe we can get a bit of a gap going.
In the second lap, we had a problem with the bow tank, which is the ballast tank in the front of the boat, which actually caused us a tremendous problem from the second lap onwards, because we just couldn't keep the nose down and follow in the head sea. And that's what allowed Walter Ragazzi and Finscrew to get in front of us. Otherwise, the race was a doddle for us. I mean, it wasn't a problem, it was our seas, but we just, if you haven't got the ballast in the front, you kiting the boat, and we, had a few very, very hairy experiences.
You must have been pleased to have beaten Steve, though. I mean, you were out for that, weren't you?
Oh, absolutely. We were running to that following sea flat out, and, Steve was in front of me on the first turn, and I thought, right, here we go, Steve, I'm going to now show you who's the king. Because on this circuit there's 27, 28 boats running now, and the truth of a throttle man is in the rough, and it was a big following sea, and I kicked his ass basically. And Steve's foolish in some ways, because at the end of the day he only's got to finish 3rd or 2nd in each race. He didn't need to compete with me for the first position today, and I feel sorry for him in some ways. He's my friend, out of racing, but he was foolish today, and I hope perhaps he'll learn from it. But it's sad. He's not hurt, which is the main thing, but he was silly. I mean, I'm good in the following sea. I'm good in the rough, and it's one of those things.
The closest finish we've ever seen in Class 1 offshore. The end of a great day's racing.